Hi there, welcome to one more episode of the Allplane Podcast, where aviation innovators and entrepreneurs share the coolest projects they are working on. And remember, you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast, as well as many other aviation stories on our website, Allplane.tv. That's Allplane.tv. And for today's episode, let's get some warm clothing because we are heading north to the beautiful country of Norway, which has self-mandated what is perhaps currently the most ambitious decarbonization goals for the aviation industry. And no better to talk about this country-level strategy and how the Norwegian aviation industry plans to implement it than one of its main players. Olav Mosvol Larsen heads a carbon reduction program at Avinor, Norway's airport operator, a government-owned company that operates Norway's 44 airports. Avinor has been very proactively pursuing this green aviation agenda in Norway, not just by implementing green policies at its facilities, but also by engaging other players in the Norwegian aviation ecosystem and supporting initiatives to test new technologies. For example, Avinor's CEO test flies personally the latest models of electric aircraft, and Oslo's airport newest terminal has received several awards because of its environmentally friendly design. But no one better to explain all of these in full detail than Olav himself. Hello, Olav. How are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Very good. You are joining us from snowy Oslo.
Yes, that's correct. And thank you so much indeed for having me for this podcast.
That's great. I've been long waiting to have this conversation because basically what you do at Avinor is a reference in the world of aviation sustainability. Let me introduce you to the audience. You are the manager of Avinor Carbon Reduction Program, and Avinor is the company that manages pretty much all the airports in Norway, over 40 airports in total. You also are a very active player in the Norwegian carbon reduction strategy for aviation, which is one of the most ambitious in the world.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. That is one of the most ambitious in terms of timeline and ambitions, yes. And also the inclusion of such a big part of the Norwegian aviation industry has sort of signed up to this strategy. And I think that's really stimulating.
So can you tell us a bit more about yourself, your role at Avinor, and why Avinor is such an active player in this space?
Yeah, so I've been working with Avinor for almost 14 years now, working on carbon issues the whole time, giving advice to our top management. I'm currently coordinating all the sort of carbon reduction activities in our company. So with some great colleagues, we're working on reducing our own emissions, but we're also working on reducing the emissions from air traffic and also surface access to the airports. My background is from the University in Oslo, actually. I was a researcher at the University in Oslo for a couple of years before I joined Avinor, and I have never looked back.
Yeah, I can tell when we were having the chat before this call that you've been really breathing literally all this sustainability stuff for a long time, because you've been pretty much in the thick of it for a number of years and playing a role there in this very ambitious agenda. At Avinor, you published a report like 2 or 3 months ago that outlines the strategy for Norway to the year 2050. It's a very comprehensive document, but at the same time, it's very readable. There are quite a few interesting points there. What can you tell us about this whole Norwegian country strategy to become a leading place when it comes to carbon reduction in aviation?
Well, this is the 4th report in the series. So we wrote the first report in 2007 and published it in February, I think, 2008. And then there were sequels in 2011 and 2017. And now we have this new report came out in English just before Christmas in 2020. And it's been a joint sort of work group working on this report. There's been representatives from the 3 domestic airlines in Norway, Scandinavian Airlines, Norwegian Air Shuttle, and Widerøe, the regional airline, together with the Confederation of Aviation Industries and also the main labor union. So the whole sort of story behind this report, which is termed Aviation in Norway, Sustainability and Social Benefits, that's the English translation, is that we wanted to showcase that we are totally dependent on aviation in Norway. Norway is for many practical purposes an island. We have a long stretch border to Sweden, but if you want to or have to travel abroad, you will basically have to travel by air.
Yeah,
and
actually,
also
is it possible actually to travel all the length of Norway by land, or it's cut at some places?
Oh yes, no,
Yeah.
it's possible. You can even do it without taking a ferry. Maybe for the last stretch, very north at the North Cape, there's a tunnel there now, so you can actually drive. You can bicycle if you want to. But then there are all the topography, it's all the mountains and the fjords.
Yes.
So it's not the rail network is not that much developed. So people are basically quite dependent on air travel for also domestic purposes. So in fact, half of all the emissions from the Norwegian aviation industry is from domestic travel, more or less.
Mm-hmm. And domestic travel, actually, it's one of the, let's say, most ambitious targets is actually referring to domestic travel. We will have the chance to cover it more deeply later, but you have this ambitious goal of making electric or making it fossil free.
Yeah, Avinor, we a couple of years ago, we stated a vision that we thought that by 2040, all domestic air travel in Norway could be electrified. Not necessarily 100% battery electric, but electrified in terms of using electric motors, but it could be hybrid electric solutions or even fuel cell solutions powering those electric motors. So yes, that's our vision for the domestic market. So, but going back to the report, this is the fourth report in the series, and we've been trying to showcase why we are so dependent on aviation in Norway. What is the facts about emissions from the aviation industry? What's the numbers? And then what can we do to mitigate the emissions? And then we've made sort of projections or trying to show what happens if traffic growth is X and Y or Z and emission reductions is like this or that. Then we'll end up in a couple of decades from now with emissions in this magnitude. So what is new about the fourth report is that we have agreed the whole aviation industry in Norway, the parties I mentioned, that our goal as a common group is that aviation in Norway should be fossil free by 2050, and by that we means all traffic or air traffic in Norway and traffic departing Norway should be fossil free by the means of sustainable aviation fuels, electrification, or hydrogen propulsion.
Yeah, I read the report and I got this idea that there is no silver bullet. It's a combination of measures. So you are looking at it, let's say, in a holistic way. You have set up some goals for the use of sustainable biofuels, and you also are pushing an electrification agenda, but you're also looking at other technologies, hydrogen, of course, but also things like optimization of operations. Obviously, for the airlines that are involved in this work group also are considering things like making fleets more efficient, etc.
Yep.
So from the point of view of Avinor, what are you doing today to be on path to fulfill these goals? Because I read you are already implementing a number of measures. Actually, I think you've been already offsetting emissions for a number of years, but then you are, for the coming years, you are planning other measures as well. So electrifying the ground fleet, for example. You open a new terminal that has all the best practices in terms of sustainability. What can you tell us about Avinor specifically?
Well, I think from the group's point of view, reducing carbon emissions has been a priority for more than a decade now. I think we started offsetting the emissions from our own operations, so that's from Avinor's operations in 2007. So we're so-called carbon neutral, the whole company, and we have taken a lot of measures to reduce our own emissions over the years. Yes, definitely electrifying the fleet of ground vehicles, our own vehicles. We're doing a lot of measures in the terminals and all the buildings at our 44 airports. We are currently phasing in huge amounts of sustainable biodiesel in the snow removal equipment. In fact, I think at Oslo Airport last year, although 2020 was a little bit odd in terms of emissions, more than 90% of the diesel that was used was sustainable aviation. No, so sustainable biodiesel.
2020.
Yeah, that was 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and in terms of the terminals, we're using, trying to use wood and natural materials to the extent possible. In terms of, you always have to sort of balance it with economic and functional needs. But we're trying to have a focus on so-called embedded carbon, trying to use building materials that do not have a lot of emissions when they are produced. And also Oslo Airport, the terminal extension, certified as BREEAM Excellent when it opened some 4 or 5 years back. And we've had same sort of measures at other terminal projects throughout the country. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, we are definitely trying to reduce the emissions from our own operations, and also sort of talk more about the ground vehicles we are, because electric vehicles are really sort of on the bestseller list in Norway. I think approximately half of all new cars sold are fully electric, and we've been trying to also to sort of push that development by creating and establishing a lot of charging points at our airports. So I believe we have more than 1,300 charging points now at our airports, and I believe that would make us the world's airport the airport operator in the world with the most charging points.
Yeah, sorry,
at our premises.
Yeah, if I can stop you here 1 second, I just because I was just looking at the numbers, and it looks like in 2020, so the year that just ended, the electric vehicles accounted for over half. Yeah, so the majority of new cars sold in Norway are already electric as of now.
Yeah, fully electric. Yeah.
That possibly gives Norway a leadership spot when it comes to electric cars.
Yeah, I think when it comes to phasing in electric cars and starting to use them, yes, definitely. But we're not producing any of them, of course. So it's all imports. But
yeah.
Yes, using electric cars is really catching on here
due
to lots of incentives from the government.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, you obviously have all this hydroelectricity as well, so I guess it makes sense to go electric. Although Norway is still a big exporter of oil. I don't know. It's a bit out of scope now of this conversation.
Yeah,
but that's a bit the paradox, right? I mean, you are an oil exporting country, but at the same time is a leader in decarbonization.
Yes, indeed, that's sort of the paradox. Definitely, we are. Some people call us the petroholics. So our economy is fairly dependent on the petroleum industry. We're exporting one of the bigger oil and gas exporting countries in the world. But at the same time, we have huge amounts of sustainable electricity as well. So almost 100% of our electricity production is hydropower. We're also exporting clean in the year with normal precipitation. We are exporting clean electricity to the Nordics and to the rest of Europe. So we're sort of yes, we are both. We are both polluting the world with our oil and gas exports, and also trying to clean it up by doing things with our electricity and other measures. So yes, definitely a paradox and a dilemma.
Yeah, well, I have to say I had the chance to visit an hydroelectric plant in central Norway a few years ago in relation to a professional project I was doing at the time. I was very impressed by the amazing electric generation infrastructure that is there in the fjords, in those mountains. Like they're all perforated with tunnels and dams and hydroelectric plants. Really, really impressive.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So back to aviation, you mentioned the biofuels, and I got the impression that the Norwegian strategy places a strong accent on biofuels to at least bridge this gap until, let's say, the electric and hydrogen technologies are available more broadly for aviation. You have set up a goal of having 30% of fuel consumption coming from biofuels by 2030. Is this 30% for all flights coming in and out of Norway, or is it only for domestic flights? And where is this biofuel going to come from? I know there are a number of Norwegian companies that are experimenting with biofuel, sustainable jet fuel technology, because of course, the thing with biofuel, you also need to make sure that it comes from sustainable sources in order to claim that it's sustainable. What can you tell us about this biofuel strategy?
Well, if you let me, I'll travel a little bit back in time, because
sure,
to the point of departure for this podcast, because in the first report I mentioned, we published in 2008. We wrote maybe half a page on sustainable aviation fuels, and in those days it wasn't any talk about flight shaming and that kind of stuff, because that's a rather new phrase. But greenwashing was very high on the agenda, so we didn't really dare to write too much about sustainable aviation fuels. But then only a couple of years later, in 2009, sustainable aviation fuels was certified for use in civil aviation for the first time. And then later on in 2011, HEFA was certified, another production route of sustainable aviation fuels, and we sort of started to see light in the end of the tunnel. So we've been sort of monitoring this development for 13, 14 years now. And we've had a couple of research projects together with Norwegian research institutions and consultants. We're publishing reports and trying to put it on the agenda in Norway. And in 2014, the first biofuel flights were carried out in Norway, and those were not the first flights at all, but we were maybe looking in hindsight, maybe too sensitive about the greenwashing debate. But anyhow, in 2014, we decided to carry out a couple of flights together with SAS and the Norwegian Air Shuttle, and one of the Norwegian green groups, environmental NGO called Zero. And then sort of pace picked up, and I believe it was in late 2014, Torbjørn Larsen, the then CEO of what was called Statoil Aviation, that was later acquired by Air BP, came to us and said, hey, we're considering a project together with Lufthansa Group. Would you like to make Oslo Airport the first airport in the world where biofuels is available for all airlines refueling there? And it took my CEO maybe 2 seconds to say, yes, we would like to be part of this project. And then things got a little bit delayed due to several sort of bureaucratic and technical issues. But then eventually in January 2016, Oslo Airport actually became the first international airport in the world where aviation biofuels was available for all airlines on a commercial basis. And we also the first airport in the world where biofuels were dropped in to the main fuel farm and distributed in a hydrant and dispenser system. And sort of that project went on for 3 years. We also expanded to Bergen, and during the course of this, from Avinor's side, we sort of hinted that by 2030, due to the sort of information we had gathered in the reports I mentioned, that 30% of all fuel uplifted in Norway could actually be biofuels. So that was sort of a little bit of discussion in that in the media, etc.
There is now already, I think, since 2020, a requirement for airlines in Norway to carry still relatively small percentage, I think 0.5% at the moment of
yes, correct,
biofuel blended in the jet fuel they consume.
Yeah, that's correct. There had been a what we call a drop-in mandate. It's also has other terms and names, but basically it's required by law to drop in or to blend in a certain amount of sustainable fuels into the fossil fuels every year. And that's been going on for the road transport for I don't remember how many years now, but steadily increasing. And then the government decided to expand that also to the aviation industry. So that was a parliament decision that from starting in 2020 actually, 0.5% of all fuel uplifted, all jet fuel uplifted in Norway should be so-called advanced aviation biofuels. And now also other countries are considering the same, and I think it will be implemented in Sweden from this summer, perhaps 2021. And I know there's also discussion about the EU-wide mandate and also mandates or similar mandates in other European countries. And the Norwegian Parliament's goal is that by 2030, 30% of all fuel uplifted in Norway should be sustainable aviation fuels, based on this sort of implemented by this mandate. So yes, that's indeed sort of both the governments taking their measures, but also the both SAS and Norwegian Air Shuttle have quite ambitious biofuel goals on their own, even without the mandate. So this is sort of both voluntary and there is both a voluntary push and also a sort of legislative pull for this to happen. Yeah.
Yes. Regarding these two airlines, I'm gonna post it in the show notes, but they have made public their commitments. For example, SAS has committed to reduce, I think, the emissions by 25% to have the emissions 25% less than they were in 2005 by 2025. I'm not sure if that's the right way to put. Yeah. Okay. Yep. And Norwegian also has.
And that's total CO2 emissions, not only emissions per passenger, but total CO2 emissions.
Yeah. Norwegian also recently published its own goals. One question I have here about the biofuels: what is the bottleneck that is preventing biofuels from becoming more widely used? On one hand, if I understand correctly, is the cost, because they are more expensive than the conventional fuel. But there's also a sort of supply bottleneck, isn't it?
Well, there are several issues, but there is sort of a traditional egg and hen thing. Prices are high, costs are high for production, and then demand is fairly low, which means that production is also fairly low, which means that you can't reduce the costs or production costs. So it's sort of a circular thing there. But then that said, biofuels or biomass, it is a lot more costly process than producing fossil fuels. And I can illustrate that actually, because when I mentioned the flights in 2014, and apologies if I get the numbers totally wrong, but I think in the fall of 2014, the oil price per barrel of oil was more than $100. And then it was this dramatic drop in the oil price. So by 2016, when Oslo Airport became the first airport in the world, etc., the oil price was down to $20 or $30 per barrel. So extreme drop in the cost of fossil fuels as well, and that made it difficult for these new sustainable aviation fuels to compete with the oil price. And I think that's something that both sort of politicians and NGOs and everybody sort of have to keep in mind, that aviation is an extremely competitive global business. So let's say a few airlines in a small region have a lot higher operating costs than their competitors. They will sooner or later be out of business. So this is also sort of making it difficult to regulate the aviation industry, because it's so global by its nature compared with, I think, any other industry.
Yes, you mentioned it in the report. Actually, there's a line that says explicitly that fuel, and not even talking about biofuel here, but fuel in general, it's more expensive in Norway. So many airlines, they would fill the tank somewhere outside of Norway and then make sure they have enough fuel to make the trip back and forth. So that means that they overall consume more fuel because they are flying heavier, and that's something that happens.
Yeah, I think we said so that there's a risk of increased so-called tankering. Which is a real issue actually.
You mentioned also advanced biofuels. What defines whether a biofuel is advanced? Is it because it comes, the whole production cycle, it's also sustainable. Is this the difference between advanced and non-advanced biofuel?
I think the main difference is that advanced biofuels, and there are slight different definitions of this, that the biomass used in the fuel production should be based on waste or residues.
Okay, so that
and then there
crowd out
go ahead.
other crops or
exactly
or takes land that would be just a forest.
Exactly. So no food, no fodder, and we have all this ILOC problematic. But then there's obviously a lot of discussions on what is waste and what is residues. Could it be applied for something else? But there we just have to sort of trust the authorities in their definitions, and we as an airline industry, we cannot make those decisions by ourselves. So we're using the guidelines and the certifications that are sort of official from the governments.
Mm-hmm. And besides the biofuel, there's also the whole world of electric aviation, and I think here Avinor has also had a very active role, to the point that Avinor as an airport operator invested in electric aircraft of its own, basically to test several ideas and concepts around the development of electric aviation. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting story, because I remember in 2010 working in this business, I was sort of reading all the newsletters and what came up and whatnot, and then we saw this little acrobatic aircraft Cricri flying fully electric in France, and I looked at the picture and I sort of thought to myself, well, okay, that was really amazing, but let's wait and watch what happens here, because it didn't look like it would sort of have relevance for commercial traffic anytime soon. And then was sort of a breathtaking moment, at least for me, that in I think it was summer, July perhaps, 2015, the same guys, Didier and Estaing and some other French people, together with Airbus, and I don't remember the exact consortium, but they developed a fully electric aircraft that flew across the English Channel, epic electric flight. And then it sort of occurred to us, because that flight was 72 kilometers, and that's actually a lot longer than some of the domestic routes flown in Norway today. I think the shortest flight in Norway is 32 kilometers only. So, and we have a number of flights shorter than 70 kilometers. And then it occurred to us that, okay, this could be a thing of the future. We knew a little bit about battery development. We have had hybrid cars in Norway for a long time, obviously, and sort of we started looking into this, and some sort of friends and colleagues in the Norwegian Air Sports Federation. That's the guys organizing all the general aviation and the parachuters and all that kind of stuff. They came to us and said, well, should we do a project on electrification of aviation together? And again, we said yes. So in 2016, Didier and came together with a team from Airbus, came to a big carbon conference downtown Oslo with their little electric aircraft, and we had a very nice chat with them at the conference. Obviously, we were there a couple of days together, displaying the aircraft, talking about aviation and carbon emissions. And in 2017, I believe it was February or March, our board of directors and the top management, they went to visit Airbus in Toulouse and got a very nice brief from Glenn Llewellyn and some of his colleagues, I believe, about sort of what they could see in the crystal ball of the future. And then it was getting clearer and clearer for us that many of the flights in Norway could be flown electrically, or at least without liquid fuels. From that whole internal discussion, where my CEO Dag Falk Petersen was really a driving force, and our strategy director as well, Jon Sjølander, who sort of came up with a vision that we believe that by 2040, looking at the information we have now from the aircraft from the OEMs, we believe that actually all domestic air traffic in Norway could be electrified. That was sort of our vision, and that really caught on. And I think it was in the headlines many corners of the world, because it was the first time a state-owned company had said that, and we also stated it in a meeting with the environmental minister of Norway in those days. So it sort of caught on,
and
we
actually
still believe that is possible. Yeah.
And one of the main domestic, I don't know if it's the largest, but the airline that is covering many of these short-haul routes between Norway is Widerøe. Sorry if I don't pronounce it correctly. Has also committed to being an early adopter of electric aircraft as soon as they become available at this scale. Definitely something that you guys taking very seriously. Sorry, you were. I distracted you from the story about the aircraft. So, how did you end up then? Operating your own electric aircraft.
That was actually part of that project with Norwegian Air Sports Federation. So it's like we realized that when talking to people about electric aviation, it was like, yeah, right. We hear what you're saying, but we don't really believe you. So we decided to buy an aircraft, and the only aircraft we could buy was the Pipistrel Alpha Electro, which made the choice very easy. So we got delivery of that aircraft in May or June 2018, I think. And that has been just a very nice experience, I must say. One thing is sort of learning how this works with the charging and sort of getting to grips a little bit with electrifying aviation, because that will have a huge impact on us as an airport operator as well. In the future, we expect aircraft to a bigger extent to need both charging and perhaps also hydrogen supply. So we're sort of getting an idea of what follows that. But what the best thing about the aircraft has been is actually it has been an extremely efficient communication platform to talk about aviation and carbon emissions in what we believe is a balanced way, to sort of admit the problems we have with emitting 900 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere every year on a global scale, which is equivalent to somewhere between 2 and 2.5% of total CO2 emissions in the world. But then at the same time that there are technical solutions and that there are technologies that can sort of take us out of this rather miserable situation of being so dependent on fossil fuels, that there are technologies out there that can take us forward and that can make aviation part of a zero and low emission future society that we know we have to get there, and now we're getting to grasp with some of the technologies that can actually get us there, and we think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, and actually there's one episode of this electric plane experience. I don't know if you want to comment, but I think there was some mishap, right, at some point, and one of these the aircraft had to make an emergency landing in a lake due to some technical issue. But despite this experience, I think there was a minister on board or some high-ranking government officer on board. Yeah, but I mean, just a proof of that, you're not taking this commitment lightly is that despite all of this, you have renewed this commitment by ordering a new aircraft to replace the one that had this issue and continue this program.
Yes, indeed. That was in the summer of 2019, in early August. It was actually my CEO that was pilot on that flight, and he had a guest on board. It was deputy minister, and they had the engine stopped, and he couldn't start it again. So he had to make an emergency landing, and it was kind of a foresty area around the little airport that we used as a base, and the only suitable place he could find was a little lake. So he landed the aircraft in the lake, and the photos from that from that story looks very dramatic, because it looks like he sort of had dived into the lake, but it was actually fairly smooth landing, and they were not even wet. They got a little bit wet on their feet when stepping on shore from the aircraft, and then after that the aircraft tipped. But that also meant that the aircraft would need either a big restoration, or we would have to sort of get the full replacement. So we decided to, after a short process, to buy a new aircraft of more or less the same type as a Pipistrel Velis Electro, but this is the model that is also certified by EASA. And we're getting delivery of that in May this year, if everything goes according to plans. We're looking forward to fly that now in summer of 2021.
Great. Yeah.
So that has definitely not stopped us from working along this path of trying to find new zero or very low emission propulsion technologies for aviation.
Yeah, actually, the Pipistrel is an interesting aircraft. I had the chance, a bit of self-promotion here, but there's a previous episode of this podcast where I interviewed the founder of Pipistrel and his current CEO.
Ivo. Okay.
So I just mentioned it here. So in case someone is interested in checking the story of Pipistrel, there's a whole podcast episode about it. And I did also another episode with these guys in Germany that did a flight from Switzerland to the North Sea using Pipistrel Velis as well. So so I want to post this in the show notes so that anyone that is interested in expanding their information about this particular Pipistrel aircraft can find the information. So Olav, you told me about the efforts to electrify, but what about hydrogen? Because that's a technology source that has been touted as being one of the most promising particularly for the, let's say, longer haul type of routes. What are you guys doing at Avinor in hydrogen?
Well, indeed, hydrogen is really coming up as a tangible solution for zero or very low emission aviation in the future, and we are definitely monitoring this development very closely. We have already some experience actually with hydrogen at Oslo Airport, because we had a couple of hydrogen cars running there for a number of years. We had a hydrogen refueling station at Oslo Airport, both for our own vehicles and also for the general public, for our passengers.
For cars.
But anyways, for cars, yeah. So hydrogen is a very sort of extremely convenient. Maybe that's not the word, but it's a very nice energy carrier. It is already used in producing some types of biofuels to sort of enrich hydrogenate biofuels. It could be a very important. Well, it is definitely an important part in what is called electrofuels that is coming up. E-fuels, that's also sort of trending in terms of reducing emissions.
Can I stop you here 1 second? When you mentioned electrofuels, can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, electrofuels is creating hydrocarbons, so that's fuel, basically fossil fuel, but using hydrogen from a renewable source, so clean green or blue, what we call blue hydrogen, and then adding carbon atoms from some other source. It could be biogenic carbon, or it could be carbon from a factory, any type of carbon basically.
So it's a sort of carbon capture that is then kind of recycled, like let's say carbon recycling.
Yeah, it is at least used once more. So what then in the sort of the big scheme of things one should avoid to, in the future we cannot emit any new fossil carbons into the atmosphere. So there is already a debate ongoing about the sustainability of certain types of electrofuels, but there is a potential there to use clean hydrogen and carbon from a decent source, make it into a liquid fuel that can be used in today's hardware or today's aircraft and today's fuel infrastructure. And it will not have the same limits as sustainable aviation fuels or biofuels in terms of supply of biomass. So that's two applications of hydrogen in the aviation industry, and then it's obviously using hydrogen in a electrolyzing now in a fuel cell to create electricity for a electric motor, and that would be under what we have defined as electrified aircraft. But then there's also a kind of another option, and that is to combust hydrogen directly in custom jet engines. That has been done already as a Russian aircraft, a Tupolev, I think, in the 80s. It's been used in the airspace industry, and also probably for other civil appliances. So hydrogen is really coming up as a tangible solution, as I said, and I think it's extremely interesting that a company like Airbus published their strategy or a big activity called Zero E, to have an hydrogen or zero emission aircraft in the market by 2035, and that could really revolutionize air travel. And from Avinor's point of view, we are, as we have talked about a couple of times, airport operators, so we will be more or less responsible for infrastructure on the ground. And we have committed that we will not be a bottleneck, rather the opposite. We will be a driving force in trying to get both electricity, if charging is required, or hydrogen available at our airports when this aircraft will be both tested and also used on more regular commercial basis. So that's definitely our commitment. We monitor both ZeroAvia and Airbus and other activities in this domain very closely.
Are there specific tangible plans, though? At the moment, it's just a commitment to follow through as soon as this technology becomes more widespread.
What we have done, and I think I have to compare it with what we've done on electrification. We have mapped what we call the electricity supply and the use or demand at all our airports and in their vicinities. So we have a decent idea about what the capacity is in local grids. And we're planning to do something similar for hydrogen after summer, perhaps, to sort of get a decent overview of possible supply chains, look at these different technologies, liquid hydrogen storage, what's the requirements? Could it be, in the future, it could even be electrolyzers at the airports producing hydrogen on site. I don't know if that is science fiction or science or what it is yet, but we will definitely look into this, and we will be ready if this is required by the airlines in the future, for sure.
Indeed, it's the supply chain for the hydrogen economy. It's actually one of the most important aspects, I think. I had the chance to speak with one of the founders of Universal Hydrogen, which is a US startup. It was started by a former Airbus CTO, and they propose a very interesting system, modular, where you can have all these capsules of hydrogen that would be easily transportable and then fitted into aircraft that needs to be specially modified. But what they told me it's not a very complex thing to do. I mean, you have to invest a little bit in it, but still, it's interesting. I guess we're going to see more of this innovation in this space to sort out these constraints on the supply side.
Yeah,
very good.
Yeah. So we're looking forward to follow that, and we're monitoring both the development of sustainable aviation fuels, the sort of electrification of aviation, and also the developments in the hydrogen domain. So it's extremely interesting times. Yeah,
you are committed to this decarbonization, but there is one spot in your network of all your 44 airports under your management that is a bit special, isn't it? I mean, there's this place in the very, very far north, even close to the North Pole. I think it's the airport that is farther north anywhere in the world that has regular commercial traffic, and I'm talking about the archipelago of Svalbard. There's a very particular situation there because you have an airport that runs on coal.
Yeah.
So how is it? I mean, that there is this airport that's very unusual situation because I cannot think of any other airport running on coal anywhere in the world.
No, well, there probably are some, but no, the situation in Svalbard is that there's actually several big coal mines up there, and it's far from any mainland. The Norwegian mainland is the closest, and that's I don't know how many days with ship. It's a couple of hours flight to get there. So the whole Svalbard or Longyearbyen, which is the main city or village, is fully dependent on coal, both for heating and for electricity.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no such sort of easy or quick fix in trying to replace coal as the main energy carrier. Yeah. What we have done at the airport, though, is, interestingly enough, that one airport constitutes something like 16% of Avinor's total carbon emissions from our airport operations, that little airport.
Which is crazy, because it's a really remote place that maybe, I mean, I don't know what's the traffic, but it might possibly getting a couple of flights a day or something like that to link it to the mainland.
And it's basically the lifeline of that community, so it's very important. But what we have done, though, we're trying to find new solutions. So we have installed solar panels on many of the buildings, a couple of small windmills, and now we're carrying out a project, sort of feasibility study. If we can find a new energy solution for a total off-grid energy solution for sand storage and cargo warehouse. And based on the experiences from that, we're looking into sort of do the whole airport operations off grid from the big coal energy plant up there. But then in parallel with this, the Norwegian government have decided that by 2022, I think, or 2023, the news just came out a couple of weeks ago, that they're aiming to shut down the coal energy plants at Svalbard within a certain number of years. So by 2025 or 27 or something, depending on the technology they choose, Svalbard will also be fossil free. I think that's the plan. So we'll see how this goes in parallel. But we're obviously in very nice and good contact with the Norwegian authorities and the local authorities in Svalbard, and see how the airport can sort of fill in and be instrumental in that shift. So that's an extremely interesting project, actually, from an extremely interesting place in so many respects.
Indeed, it's in very high up in my bucket list, I must say, because it's I've seen quite a few pictures and it looks really impressive. It's also the place where you can see polar bears. If you go out in the open, you need to carry a rifle with you or something like that, just in case you're attacked by polar bears, I think.
Yeah, that's true. That's right.
Yeah. It's very close to the North Pole. But
when we can travel again, we should go together. I haven't been there yet, so it's really high on my bucket list as well.
With pleasure. So in any case, you have a company goal at Avinor to be totally fossil free by 2030, right? So that obviously that refers to your own operations. So the buildings and the ground movements and all that, not the airplanes, but still, I mean, 2030, that's right around the corner. What's the current situation when it comes to this goal?
Well, the goal was set based on sort of the ACI, Airport Council International goal for all airports in Europe, that by 2050, all airports should be sort of so-called net zero carbon. And you already mentioned our electricity situation and sort of in Norway, and also that we're trying to be ahead and push the agenda. So our CEO decided that our target should be 2030. And mind you, the Swedavia, the Swedish airport operator, has an even more ambitious goal.
Oh, yeah?
So, yeah. And we translated it to make it possible to communicate to fossil-free airport operations. So we should not use fossil fuels by 2030. So one of my great colleagues, Hege Ringnes, is now and others are looking into this now, building a plan step by step, looking into new technologies for ground vehicles, for runway de-icers, for firefighting training sites, for basically all the stuff we use at an airport every year. And what technologies are in the coming, what can we start investing in now, what needs more research and development, what can we sort of count on in the future. So we're building this plan now step by step, and it will obviously be a balance between investing in new zero emission technologies and using biodiesel or biofuels, other kinds of stuff that's based on biomaterials. But the goal is indeed to reach fossil-free airport operations by 2030. So we have 10 years to complete the job, and I'm pretty confident that we will succeed.
Just to remark here, one thing is that when you're talking about fossil-free, not carbon neutral, because you've been already offsetting emissions for quite some time, but actually to make sure that all the energy that you consume is really not that it's not putting more carbon in absolute numbers into the atmosphere.
Correct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you have 10 years, I guess, to push this, which is quite ambitious if you consider how many things are going on in an airport. Is this for the whole network or only for Oslo Airport?
No, this is from Avinor, the airport group.
Okay, all the 44.
Yeah. All the 44 airports, yeah.
And one thing I also wanted to mention here, you are also looking at things like the management of airspace, right? Because one thing is, taking care obviously of all the terminals, the ground movements and all that, but you are also, as a group, you are also responsible for air operations management, right? Air traffic management. That's also something that you are taking care of from a sustainable carbon reduction point of view.
Yes, that's correct. We are also the air navigation service provider in Norway. So Avinor is responsible for air traffic management in Norwegian airspace. It's now organized as a daughter company, that we call it, a separate company, but it's fully owned by Avinor Group. So yes, indeed, we have been working on optimizing both approaches and departures, and also the sort of the total airspace for a number of years, implementing what we used to in the old days called green landings and departures, which is now called continuous descent and arrivals. We're using so-called performance-based navigation, PBN approaches, using satellite technology to shorten the in-flights, implementing CDM, collaborative decision making, etc., free route airspace, doing quite a lot of interesting stuff in the airspace that obviously the general public cannot see. The pilots and the airlines can see it more or less. They always have comments on what you're doing. Sometimes positive comments, and sometimes maybe more constructive comments, or where there's room for improvements. We definitely hear that as well. But yes, we have indeed over the years had several projects trying to make our airspace more efficient, and thus reducing the fuel burn from the airlines, and also carbon emissions, obviously.
Yeah, that's actually a dimension of air operations that are usually, maybe because they are not tangible, it's not visible to the naked eye, tend to be kind of forgotten in the general debate. But actually, there's still quite a lot of scope to reduce emissions through a more efficient management of the airspace, like you are trying to do. I had on a podcast a few weeks ago, I had on the podcast the founder of Open Airlines, which is a French company that does software that helps the airlines actually do that as well. So optimize a flight path, for example, so that pilots can fly smarter and burn less fuel. And this is also a very important part of what can be done to basically to consume less fuel, less fossil fuel. It's interesting to see that you guys also on top of it. So much to unpack here. So many things going on in parallel. I guess the key here is that there is no silver bullet, as I said earlier. So it's a whole combination of measures. And so basically for people that wish to learn more about your activities in this area and to see what sort of activities and programs you have now ongoing, maybe what are the best resources you can recommend? Going to your website, or you have other channels where people can be up to date with all your activities in sustainability?
Yeah, I think as of now, like mid-January 2021, I think the report we've been talking a little, sort of been centering our discussion around. I hope you can post a link to that press release and the report in the
definitely in the show
notes here.
Yeah.
In the show notes, yeah. And then I must say that we will in the coming weeks make a full refurbishment of our English website, which is definitely not up to speed. So in a couple of weeks, perhaps early February 2021, we aim to have more information on our English language website as well. The Norwegian version is a little bit better. So Avinor.no, yeah.
Avinor.no, okay. Very good.
So I think basically it's sort of for us in the aviation industry, this is an aviation podcast, is that it's extremely hard to foresee the world without aviation in the future. Even during a pandemic, there has been quite a lot of air travel actually. So we're totally dependent on aviation, but we have to reduce the emissions from our industry, and we have to work together to find the solutions. And after being some years in the aviation industry, I'm just so thankful, and I think it's such a nice thing to go to work every morning and work with all these nice people in the OEMs and in the airlines and everywhere, sort of trying to push the agenda to find zero and very low emission solutions for the future aviation, which we think we're totally dependent on finding these solutions to get the license to operate in the future.
Yeah, indeed. There's so much going on as well now. I mean, some of this technology is still early stage, but you see so much activity around. And well, from this podcast, we kind of try to, showcase them, so that people can be on top of what's going on. And particularly interesting is to look at examples of those organizations that are a bit ahead of the curve, like is the case of Avinor, because I guess that's kind of showing the path where others will follow later on. Well, Olav, it's been great having this very, very extensive, detailed conversation about all the different things that you guys are doing there in Norway. I will be posting all these links and resources on the show notes so that people can have a look.
Yes, definitely. So I feel like we could talk for hours, but it's been very nice being here and talking to Mikael. And who knows, maybe we'll travel to Svalbard together in the future.
Hopefully, I'm all for it. Very good. Okay. Thank you, Olav.
Okay, and thank you again for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Before you go, and if you like this podcast, a quick reminder that it would be absolutely great if you could please give it a rating on Apple, Spotify, or whichever platform you're using, or recommend it to a friend or whomever might be interested. Thank you very much, and see you soon.